old were you when you first went over there?
If it was 2 years ago, I was 16.
When you first went to give a massage, it was just a massage?
Just a massage.
As you continued to go, did it escalate more?
It escalated whenever he wanted. So I didn't know what to think, and I'd, be like, I don't know how to, I'm sorry.
Take a deep breath. I can see it in your eyes already.
Jeffrey's gonna get me. You guys realize that, right? He's gonna figure this out, and I'm not safe now. You understand that, right? I'm not safe.
Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
It's the most twisted story of the decade.
Jeffrey Epstein's a pedophile billionaire.
A billionaire who has mysterious connections to the most powerful people in the world.
Prince Andrew, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, Bill Clinton.
This guy, he could get away with anything.
In this special, our exclusive interviews explore crucial questions.
I am a cousin of Prince Andrew. I saw Jeffrey and Ghislaine every single day.
I am the first person who reported Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein had asked me to take over the defense of his criminal case.
I suicide watched Jeffrey Epstein.
Who helped him commit these crimes?
Ghislaine told me proudly, I help him out by bringing in the females.
Epstein created a sex trafficking network in which his employees would recruit girls.
Every co-conspirator needs to be behind bars.
What horrors did the victims experience?
The charges allege that Epstein sexually abused young girls.
I saw a lot of children coming in, little girls.
There is sadness, there is anger, there's scars that will never heal, ever.
Yeah, so many people as a boy was about 16, 17. All the girls were couples.
The scale of what he did is almost too much for the human mind to take in.
How did he get away with it for decades?
The feds negotiated such a sweetheart deal.
They allowed Epstein to continue to prey on women.
Just a travesty of justice like people could not imagine.
And finally, who killed Jeffrey Epstein?
I definitely think he was murdered.
I'm convinced he killed himself. Case closed for me.
I don't believe he took his own life.
One can only guess what secrets he took to the grave.
The MCC, or the Metropolitan Correctional Center, is on the corner of Pearl Street and Park Row, which is located in Lower Manhattan. It's close to the epicenter of the financial industry, Wall Street. You would never know it's a jail. It's almost like a forgotten world. They house some of the most notorious criminals in the world.
On the morning of August 10th, 2019, the guards at the MCC were starting to deliver the breakfasts to all of the prisoners who were on the 9th floor.
And this particular unit was called the SHU, where they house all of the high-profile inmates.
The SHU, the Special Housing Unit, which is a really nasty place to be because it's cold, it's noisy. There were mice everywhere and big water bugs.
The guards approach the cell housing inmate number 763-18054. And they peer through the window. And what they see is nothing short of terrible. There's an inmate on his knees, motionless, and it appears that he's got a cloth noose tied around his neck. The man is none other than Jeffrey Epstein, 66-year-old financier and accused serial child molester. So they rush in and they got him loose.
They were really freaking out because they knew they up.
Mr. Epstein was non-responsive, and at that point, there's a radio call that goes out, an emergency alarm goes off. There's a medical response team to Mr. Epstein's cell. They immediately remove him from the cell and take him directly to the hospital.
doctors raced to save the life of the financier, who had been arrested just a month earlier by the New York Police Department and the FBI. On the day of the arrest, investigators serve a search warrant on Epstein's Upper East Side mansion.
9 East 71st Street is an extremely extravagant townhome. It's a massive place, one of the biggest in New York, valued at $77 million. It overlooks the Frick collection of art. Less than 45 seconds and you can be in Central Park. It has some very tall, 15 feet high oak doors, very thick. And the NYPD has a battering ram. They batter open those doors so they can effectuate a search warrant on those premises. Inside, they come across disgusting kind of things. They find troves of pictures of underage girls and nude pictures and possibly pictures with prominent people on them. They also find diamonds. If you're going to escape a country or you want to launder money, diamonds are your best friend. And they crack open a safe, and inside the safe they find a passport with his picture and a different name. It's actually an Austrian passport. So there's a lot of evidence there.
We announce the unsealing of sex trafficking charges against Jeffrey Epstein. The charges allege that Epstein sexually abused young girls by enticing them to engage in sex acts for money. The alleged behavior shocks the conscience.
The bombshell news of the billionaire's arrest reverberates across the globe.
Prosecutors say Epstein created a sex trafficking network in which his employees and associates would recruit girls as young as 14.
A billionaire, once connected with some of the most powerful figures in the world, arrested.
Big name people, famous people. Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, major leaders of Wall Street, Prince Andrew. They all knew Jeffrey Epstein.
He's not socializing at the local bowling alley. He's going to private multimillionaire parties with a very select group of individuals. You're talking about homes that have 15 to 18 foot high ficus hedges that you can't see behind. He attended events at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump.
While Epstein lacks the renown of his famous friends, he seems to outclass many in wealth.
His homes were magnificent, quite striking on the size and the presence at 71st Street. Remarkable place. And then Jeffrey Epstein acquired an estate in Florida, in North Palm Beach, that was also a beautiful home. And he acquired an apartment in Paris, France, a ranch in New Mexico, and 2 islands near St. Thomas. The richest of the richest lifestyle one could imagine.
He was sort of like a reclusive, apparent financial and tax consultant to a boutique retinue of extremely wealthy families. He says, I only take clients with $1 billion or more in net worth. That was part of his power, was his mystique.
Epstein was very mysterious. He was an enigma of sorts. He was clever and smart, good with numbers, but most of the pretty substantial Wall Street investors never knew who he was.
So there's a lot of murkiness around where Epstein made all his money. Nobody really knows. Is it possible that he had something on a collection of the super rich and that maybe he was actually benefiting from it, holding it over them in some way?
The 2019 arrest is not the first time Epstein has faced legal trouble. More than a decade prior, from 2005 to 2007, he is the subject of a multi-agency sex trafficking and sexual assault investigation in Florida.
I'm Spencer Kuven. I'm an attorney practicing in Palm Beach County. I represented a number of victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Back in 2007, the Palm Beach Police Department knew of at least 40 girls that he had abused, some as young as 14, but it was probably in the hundreds. They felt they had enough evidence to charge him with multiple sex crimes against minors.
After building their case, Palm Beach police handed over to the FBI, believing the charges could mean a life sentence.
I'm John Connolly. I was investigative reporter for Vanity Fair magazine for a number of years. And in 2005, I started investigating Jeffrey Epstein. Then, in 2016, I co-wrote a book with James Patterson, which hopefully exposed him a lot more than he had been previously. In 2007, the FBI had a 53-page indictment, but then he had some of the best lawyers in the country. And then all of a sudden it disappears. Jeffrey agrees to a plea deal.
At the time, nobody really knew the details of this plea agreement his hotshot lawyers had cooked up. Dozens of young women and girls had been fully cooperating with police, yet there was Jeffrey Epstein seeming to dodge the bullet.
They give him, I think, 18 months, but he only had to do 13 of it. I don't know why, but they allowed him to get away with it. This was just a travesty of justice like people could not imagine. Hard to believe it's America. It really is. Everything about this guy and the way it's been handled, from the first time he was arrested in Palm Beach, this has been screwed by everybody. I mean, you can't have that. But you do.
Now, the 2019 arrest might finally mean justice for the victims who are furious at the way he dodged the 2007 charges.
So Epstein walks into a Manhattan federal courtroom and he pleads not guilty. And his lawyers argue that that Florida plea agreement is airtight and therefore he can't be charged. And now all of a sudden, all of his victims are starting to worry, is this guy actually gonna walk again?
But just a month into his jail stay at MCC, he's found with a noose around his neck, barely clinging to life.
They take him to a hospital, the New York Presbyterian Hospital downtown, where he's being wheeled out in a gurney with his hands cuffed and a ventilator mask across his face. But soon after, he is pronounced dead.
He should have been safe there, but he wasn't. Did he commit suicide? Was he murdered? To be determined.
News of Jeffrey Epstein's death creates a media firestorm.
We begin with breaking news, a devastating turn of events for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender dead tonight after apparently taking his own life.
The death of a billionaire in a correctional facility brings a lot of heat. And in particular, we're talking about a billionaire who has mysterious connections to the current president, to the royal throne in London, as well as to numerous strong and powerful businessmen throughout the world. Multiple investigations were opened to find out how and why Mr. Epstein died.
As Epstein's body is prepared for autopsy, authorities investigate his final days, beginning on July 23rd.
Just maybe 3 weeks before Mr. Epstein's death, there was a previous incident where it is alleged that he attempted suicide, and then he was put on a suicide watch.
I'm Bill Mercy. I spent a year at MCC Federal Prison for tax fraud, and I made the money with escorts. During that time, I had Paul Manafort as a bunkie, and I suicide watched Jeffrey Epstein. First meeting was, I said, Jeff, I'm here for tax fraud, for running an escort agency, and I got my own money. I don't need any of yours. You don't have to worry about that. You know, the fact that I'd been in the sex business was, of course, to his liking. A lot of talk about how to deal with prison. Those were the main topics. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, to me, at all. He was just, a regular guy in my demographic sitting in a suicide cell, and he didn't strike me as depressed.
After just 1 week, MCC personnel decide Epstein is not a threat to himself.
After being evaluated by particular medical staff, he's taken off suicide watch and placed back in the secure housing unit with a cellmate. He was supposed to always have a cellmate to make sure that if he did attempt to commit suicide, there would be someone there to ring the alarm. But on the day before he died, the inmate that was assigned to his cell was released. And apparently the administration then failed to assign him another roommate.
As an inmate who had been on a suicide watch recently, Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to be visually checked by guards every 30 minutes. But as the investigation into what happened the night he died progressed, it became increasingly clear that didn't happen.
And they find that the prison guards are surfing the internet and shopping, and they fall asleep when they're supposed to be watching Epstein. They don't do their round-the-clock check-ins.
They're supposed to go around at designated intervals, and they just didn't.
As investigators collect more information about that night, they discover that even more protocols had mysteriously failed.
There were 2 cameras outside of Jeffrey's cell, but when the investigators went to review them, they'd somehow malfunctioned. How did this happen? How on earth could this happen?
On the night Jeffrey Epstein died, he didn't have a cellmate, the guards didn't check on him, and the cameras happened to fail.
It's almost like a perfect storm of incompetence and failed equipment.
I mean, you put all of these things together, and it certainly seems it was an awfully convenient time for Jeffrey Epstein either to kill himself or Jeffrey Epstein to be murdered.
Everything seems to go wrong. It's very suspicious. So Jeffrey Epstein's death becomes fodder for conspiracy theories galore.
I'm David Schoen, and I'm a criminal defense lawyer. Before he died, Jeffrey Epstein had asked me to take over the defense of his criminal case. I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories, but my anecdotal information, that is my meetings with him, the mood he was in, he was upbeat, planning to fight the case, clear his name. Nobody can say that there's absolutely no basis for these conspiracy theories and stuff, so I don't believe he took his own life.
Maybe he committed suicide, maybe he was murdered. In the case of Epstein, I'm really open to all possibilities because so many crazy things happened during his life.
Law enforcement's interest in Epstein begins far from where he died, in the sunny world of Florida.
On March 15th, 2005, the Palm Beach Police Department get a frantic phone call from a woman who says her stepdaughter is a high school student in West Palm Beach. She says they've got a problem.
It was an incident that occurred maybe like three and a half weeks ago with one of my stepdaughters.
She got into a fight at school. Her parents were called, and people asked questions.
And the fight broke out because one girl called her a prostitute. They get taken down to the principal's office. She dumps out their purse and asks, why is there $300 coming out of your purse? And are you dealing drugs?
She couldn't give a straight story until eventually she admitted that she had gotten the money after going to a home on Palm Beach Island where her friend had taken her. Ever since Palm Beach has been around, you've had very wealthy people living there. John Kennedy, former president, had a winter White House there in Palm Beach. Howard Stern has a house on Palm Beach. John Bon Jovi is building a house on Palm Beach Island. Rush Limbaugh has a house on Palm Beach Island. That's ignoring the people that you would have never heard of that are actually even more wealthy, billionaires that are heads of large Fortune 500 companies that also have homes there. You compare that to once you cross over the bridge into West Palm Beach, and West Palm Beach is more like a regular-sized city. Got everyone from middle class to lower class.
Police bring in the 14-year-old and have her start at the beginning.
And how long ago was this? Oh my gosh, I can tell you the date, but it was about maybe, oh my gosh, a month and a half ago.
The way she wound up being involved, there was one girl, the cousin of her boyfriend, and she tells her, you want to make some money, you know, you got to massage this old guy in Palm Beach. You know, our family doesn't have money. So she said, okay.
You can tell you about anybody else that you know. Know that, she wanted me to be my sister.
On Sunday, February 6th, the 14-year-old and her friend go over to the ritzy part of town. They arrive at a magnificent mansion.
Okay, yeah, and I got, he said, so I was 18.
Who is this guy? Some wealthy guy named Jeff, she said.
A 14-year-old girl is telling police about how she was pulled into a terrible new world when a friend brought her to a Palm Beach mansion.
When they got there, they were greeted by someone who told her the routine, which was, we're going to go upstairs, there's a massage room, you're going to take off your shirt, you'll take off your pants, you can leave on your bra, you can leave on your underwear, and Jeffrey will be in a minute. Well, at this point, things were changing a little bit. She didn't realize she was going to have to get undressed, but she's just been taken to a place she doesn't know, and she's stuck in this house. So she goes into a massage room, and Jeffrey comes out wearing nothing but this small towel around his waist.
He was going gray. What else? Like, the skin color is like, when you have a sunburn, but it's like when you have it for a couple of days and it's kind of changes and it's like athletic.
He lays down, face up on the massage table, and he asks her to go ahead and start the massage. During the massage, he tells her that if she takes off more of her clothing, that she'll get paid more if she chooses. She said no. He said fine.
And he was like, please just sit on me, put on your body, what do you mean by that? So, and he was on his stomach, and I was doing his head, and then like, I was sitting there on his back, but a little bit above his back. Okay.
She was in shock. You've got a 14-year-old girl that didn't realize what she was getting herself into.
That's why you do not have any kind of sex with him. Heck no. I was there, and I know it's going to be like that. Yeah, so many people of the girls about 16, 17. All the girls were topless.
And then eventually he said, okay, you can go. She grabbed her clothes, put them on, and left. She was given cash by her friend after, and she just kind of stuffed it in her purse. It really was something she just, once she got into it, wanted to get out of pretty quickly. She was Jane Doe 1.
So Jane Doe number 1 files a complaint, but she does not know who he is and certainly doesn't have his last name. Police also were not sure who he was.
And the police are saying, we have enough probable cause, we really have to start looking into this guy. And she had an approximate idea of the address. They do a record search. They figure out, oh, it's this guy, Jeffrey Epstein. Let's look into him. And they start an investigation. They take every precaution. They know he's wealthy and powerful.
As authorities dig in, they learn about the financier's early days.
Jeffrey Epstein grew up near Coney Island in a gated community called Seagate. It's a Jewish-Italian neighborhood, and his parents were working class. His dad worked as a gardener and groundskeeper for the New York City Parks Department, and his mother was a homemaker, and then she took a job as like a secretary. He has a younger brother named Mark. When he was a child growing up, he's kind of like an aloof character, but he was extremely gifted. He started playing piano at the age of 5 and was a very proficient piano player. He skipped 3rd grade and then later 8th grade, and he graduated high school around the age of 16. And then he made it into a school called Cooper Union. Jeffrey Epstein studied in the School of Engineering there for 2 years. And he then also enrolls as a non-matriculating student at New York University and studies the mathematical biology of the heart and physiology.
But he never graduated from either one of them. He never got a college degree, but he knew how to get over on people.
Decades later, as Palm Beach police open a sex crimes case against Epstein, the shadowy financier earns a new nemesis.
Jeffrey's problem was Chief Michael Ryder. Honest man, honest as day is long.
As part of any investigation, Chief Ryder, at the time, he does a trash pull of Jeffrey Epstein's house to try and find some kind of corroborating evidence. When they pull Jeffrey Epstein's trash, they bring it back to the police department and essentially dump it out on a table and start to catalog what they have. They found numerous different items. They found message pads, they found notes, they found sex toys.
The trash pulls reveal evidence suggesting that Epstein had help in his trafficking ring.
They find these notepads with names of young girls, messages from Jean-Luc Brunel, some of them in code that young girls were available if he wanted them.
Jean-Luc Brunel is a French modeling scout. So it says something like, I found a Russian teacher for you. She's 2 times 8 meaning she's 16 years old. The lessons are free. You can have the first one today. And that's basically, he's got a Russian underage female that he's allowing Epstein to bring into his domain.
And now they realize that this is way bigger than just one 14-year-old. Barry Krischer got involved, who was the prosecutor for Palm Beach County. Chief Ryder tells him he's got a big case coming up. Chris says, okay, and I'll back you all the way, and we'll take this and we'll put this guy away. And, well, the investigation takes off. And they interview girls all over Florida.
But as police expand their investigation, Epstein begins to flex his influential muscles to try to kill it.
Somehow, Epstein learns that there's an investigation and that this girl has been talking to them. So one of his minions calls a 14-year-old saying something along the lines of, those who keep their mouth shut will be rewarded, those who don't will be dealt with.
As Palm Beach police expand their sex crimes investigation, a seasoned detective takes over.
Joe Carey is tough as nails, and he worked for a police chief who was just straight as an arrow. And he conducted this investigation in a way which anybody would be proud of.
So Joe Carey begins interviewing numerous young girls, who then lead him to more young girls, who then lead him to more young girls. This is a huge pyramid of young girls under the age of 18. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't going after girls from wealthy areas. He was searching for young women that $200 to $300 meant a lot. Some of these young girls lived in trailer parks, had broken homes. Some of them didn't even know where their next meals were coming from. A predator hunts for the weakest.
Manipulation has been Epstein's hallmark since the early stages of his career.
It's the 1970s. He is still living in New York. Dalton is a private school on the Upper East Side that caters to very wealthy families in New York. William Barr's father, Donald Barr, was the headmaster who likely hired Epstein in the spring of '74.
He gets a job at this elite private school teaching math and physics, and Epstein doesn't even have a college degree. How weird is that? Like, who does that?
But during his time there, he wooed and dazzled the parents, and he made a connection with Ace Greenberg.
Ace Greenberg was the second most powerful man at Bear Stearns, which was an investment house in Manhattan. He and Epstein took a liking for one another.
Ace Greenberg liked hiring what he called PSDs, poor, smart, and determined people. He had him come to Bear Stearns for an interview, and he asked him, do you know what a stock and a bond is? And Epstein said, no. Are you good at mathematics? He's like, yeah, I'm very good at mathematics. And Greenberg said, okay, I want you to come in and start on Monday. He worked in stock options and also advising wealthy clients on tax strategies, making a lot more money. And he did relatively well there within 4 years, and this is kind of unheard of. In 1980, he became a limited partner. So, I mean, he dazzled people.
But in 1981, Epstein's meteoric rise hits a snag. The Securities and Exchange Commission begins an insider trading investigation of Bear Stearns employees. There is a suggestion that Epstein is involved, but he's never charged and no one knows why. Well, pretty soon he leaves the organization with his $100,000 bonus. But after that, Epstein's career hits a real dry spell.
By 1986, he can't pay his rent and he's kind of broke, and that's when he meets Stephen Hoffenberg. Stephen Hoffenberg is kind of like the Bernie Madoff of the late 1980s, and he had ran a company called Towers Financial Corporation.
Towers Financial, their primary business supposedly was buying debt fairly cheap, and then trying to collect from people who owed money, and then they would recover the money and keep the difference. But that didn't work too well.
Stephen Hoffenberg is who I am. I had 9-year experience of working and knowing Jeffrey Epstein. That was his dream, to become super rich and change his entire lifestyle from being poor and humble. Jeffrey Epstein had the ability to get under the skin, to become the best friend of anybody that he targeted. His dynamic personality, his incredible gift of reading the other person's mind in a conversation and saying what the other person wanted to hear was remarkable, astonishing.
In the late 1980s, Epstein and Hoffenberg concoct a plan that could bring them the wealth they're seeking.
They start selling securities, bonds, and stocks to investors, and then selling them to more investors. And then when the original investors want their money back, they raise money by selling to yet more investors. This is known as a classic Ponzi scheme.
Epstein did a great job in selling securities for the Towers companies. Fabulous job. And so Towers had some very rapid success in selling securities. And the SEC looks at any company that becomes a rapid growth company.
And the SEC figures out it's a scam, and they find evidence of criminal wrongdoing, so they prosecute Hoffenberg. Jeffrey Epstein was involved in illegal operations at Towers, and that should have resulted in a criminal prosecution of Epstein. But by the time the case gets transferred to the Southern District of New York, Epstein's name entirely vanishes from the prosecution, and nobody can really explain why.
It's shocking what occurred. They had all the evidence against Epstein. He ran the Ponzi Wall Street side of the case. Awesome. He infiltrated the company's accounting department, befriended them, and stole about $17 million of Towers' financial money. And that was all documented. They did make me financially responsible for $475 million. And they sentenced me to 20 years. They gave me Jeffrey Epstein's sentence. The unequal justice is so crazy.
So once again, he avoids criminal liability, and people are wondering, how on earth does this guy manipulate himself out of every single moment of trouble?
Nearly a decade later, Palm Beach police are also finding it difficult to bring the elusive financier to justice. Then, in September 2005, their case gets a surprising jolt.
He asked me to ask my parents to emancipate me so I could live with him.
As like a girlfriend?
Sex slave, whatever you want to call it.
During the Palm Beach police investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, authorities arrest an 18-year-old woman for possession of marijuana.
During the investigation, she lets police know she wants to bargain. She offers, in exchange for leniency, information on a local pedophile. She tells a story of having been recruited by a high school friend and visiting Jeffrey Epstein's mansion for many years.
All right. And this was a year and a half ago, correct?
Maybe 2. I'm not sure. I didn't really keep track.
How old were you when you first went over there?
If it was 2 years ago, I was 16.
Okay. When you first went to give a massage, you explained that it was just a massage?
Just a massage.
How were you brought to Jeffrey?
I was brought into the one bathroom, the massage bathroom with the steam shower, and waiting on the couch in the bathroom. And Jeffrey comes up and he's like, "Hey, I'm Jeffrey."
At first, this teenager says that she was pretty put off by the things that Jeffrey Epstein was asking her to do. But like any pedophile, there's a lot of grooming that goes on, and eventually she got kind of used to it, no matter how perverse his requests.
Who were you introduced to?
One of his slaves that he has lived with him. When I say slaves, like one of the girls that he bought to like have sex with him.
She finally consented to some sex acts, but she made it very, very clear to him that there was to be no intercourse with Jeffrey.
He asked me to have sex with him, and I was just like, no, definitely not. I was like, I'll let you touch me, but I'm not going to do that.
And one of the things she said is that he had a particular characteristic with respect to his genitalia. Some of these young girls' story was very similar.
One day at Epstein's mansion, the billionaire crosses the line.
I wouldn't let him put anything inside of me. Hughes did?
He gave her an extra $1,000 that day.
Like, would you consider that to be rape, what he did?
When he put himself inside you without permission, forcibly.
I didn't say yes or anything. He just, like, I was standing up, and the table is about, like, my hip length. He just pushed me down.
That is a crime.
Okay.
That is a crime.
Jeffrey's gonna get me. You guys realize that, right? He's gonna figure this out, and he's gonna... I'm not safe now. You understand that, right? I'm not safe.
Detectives realize she's probably right, and they give her police protection. Her account is very important. Not only does it corroborate what other young girls and women have told them, it elevates it to a whole new level. She is describing rape of an underage teenager by a 50-year-old man. Reportedly, there is only one known on-the-record interview with Jeffrey Epstein. It was done in 2003 with the journalist David Bank. In it, Epstein shared some revealing thoughts about his life and work.
I realize what I am. I'm very comfortable in my own skin. I'm free to follow my own personality on my own island or on my own ranch. I can think the thoughts I want to think. I can do the work I want to do. I'm free to explore as I see fit.
Detective Joe Ricari goes to his chief, and they agree to execute a search warrant on the home. When the search warrant's executed, they go into the house and start to find materials like message pads, phone books. But what they also find is that security cameras from inside the house have been removed. Locations where there used to be computer CPU units are now gone. So clearly, Jeffrey had someone that had told him ahead of time that there was going to be a search warrant.
Epstein is not at home. Epstein is actually traveling when the search warrant was filed and executed. What I think they came to look for, they never found.
Even though there is a lack of really good evidence, they did spot one thing that was really, really significant, and that was a pink and green couch in the master bathroom. A lot of the victims had mentioned that couch, and so that piece of evidence went a long way to corroborating their accounts.
Once again, it seems Epstein somehow knew what police were doing and dodged. Still, Chief Ryder and Detective Ricari believed their case remained solid.
They wanted Epstein charged, and they felt they had enough evidence to charge him with multiple sex crimes against minors. That probable cause affidavit then went to Barry Krischer, who was in charge of the state's attorney's office back at that time. And it was then up to Barry Krischer to decide what charges to ultimately file, if any, against Jeffrey Epstein. We know now, we didn't know then, that once Jeffrey Epstein knew he was the subject of an investigation, he hired multiple high-profile attorneys. And he hired Roy Black from Miami. He hired Alan Dershowitz from Boston.
I mean, Alan Dershowitz, it doesn't get any more high-profile than that. He's got a roster of some of the most wealthy and powerful clients. O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Klaus von Bülow, Donald Trump.
Epstein's legal team dispatches an army of private investigators.
They hired private investigators to follow some of the young girls, including my clients. Alan Dershowitz started searching out all of these young girls' public profiles online. Anything that they posted, any comments they made, they did whatever it took to absolutely intimidate, embarrass, and try to pressure these young girls into dropping their claims. And then Dershowitz and his crew gave all of that information to the state's attorney's office in an attempt to try and discredit these young girls and convince Barry Krischer not to file charges, serious charges against Epstein. This pressure tactic back then, sadly, it intimidated a lot of these young girls such that they clammed up and didn't want to talk. Chief Ryder and Joe Ricari in Palm Beach were incredibly upset at how things were being handled. They felt that the ball was being dropped. They felt that Barry Krischer wasn't taking them seriously.
They weren't getting their phone calls returned, and Chief Ryder breaks rank and writes a letter to the state attorney saying, "What's going on here? You're not taking my calls. I think maybe you should even recuse yourself from the case."
Reportedly, Krischer never replies to Ryder's missive.
Barry Krischer, instead of filing charges, he decided to bring it to a grand jury.
When a prosecutor takes a case to a grand jury, everything is secret, and no one really knows what kind of case is being presented. Inside the room is the prosecutor, any witnesses he or she wants to call, and the jury. There's no defendant, there's no defense attorneys, and more importantly, there's no press.
The grand jury convenes in July 2006. Despite the alleged intimidation tactics, multiple victims are still willing to testify. Yet Krischer declines to call most of them.
Krischer only called one, and that was the 14-year-old. He had the witnesses Chief Ryder and his team had put together, who was supposed to testify. You only called one? No. Somewhere along the line, somebody got to Krischer.
Usually in a grand jury, the prosecution is trying to get the jury to indict. Not so in this case. Krischer has instructed his underlings to question one 14-year-old accuser, and things get embarrassing. She's asked about her sex life and her drinking. These are questions a cunning defense attorney would usually ask, but here it is, the prosecution smearing their own witness.
This young girl gets blindsided. She goes in and they start asking all these terrible questions.
The prosecutors were buying into the defense's story. They were buying the sexual perpetrator's story about these young girls.
One single misdemeanor charge is the final outcome of the grand jury.
The maximum sentence on that one charge? 60 days in jail.
I mean, it's just a travesty. But as far as I'm concerned, the fix was it. The investigation was done properly until Barry Krischer got involved. Was he trying to hide something? I don't know. But when you agree to do an investigation and prosecute, and then you don't, something is wrong.
All of that work by the Palm Beach Police Department, and the prosecutor just lets him skate. It's unconscionable.
Rightfully frustrated, Chief Ryder asks the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Palm Beach to open a federal investigation.
The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida was a man named Alexander Acosta. Now, this is a guy who had cut his teeth on prosecuting Cali and Medellin drug cartels. He seemed like just the guy to take on Jeffrey Epstein and finally get some justice for these young girls.
When Chief Ryder goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office, U.S. Attorney Acosta promised him that he's going to prosecute this to the fullest extent.
When the FBI began their investigation, they began to re-interview a lot of the young victims that Joe Recarey had already spoken with. In addition to that, they found additional victims that Jeffrey Epstein had abused. Ultimately, we were trying to fight on behalf of these young girls and trying to get some measure of justice.
The federal investigation goes on for 2 full years.
They come up with 40 women, and they had a 53-count indictment ready to go against Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein's looking for a powerful Republican to get him off the hook. And guess who he hires? Ken Starr.
Ken Starr. I mean, this was the prosecutor, the special prosecutor who went all in on the Clinton impeachment, which was effectively a case about sex between 2 consenting adults. And here, on the other hand, you've got Jeffrey Epstein, who is suspected of raping and molesting 40 children. Starr and Dershowitz. It doesn't get bigger than that in the legal world. Only somebody with an endless supply of money and power could assemble a team like that. And it really began to beg the question, where was Jeffrey Epstein getting all his money?
Epstein's accumulation of real wealth begins after he managed to avoid charges in the Towers Ponzi scheme.
Even though he was fired for an illegal activity at Bear Stearns, they never reported his criminal activity to the authorities. And he leaves Bear Stearns with a Rolodex of very important, wealthy individuals.
In 1981, Epstein uses that Rolodex to start his own investment company, positioning himself as a heavy hitter.
In order to attract a wealthy client, you have to appear to be successful. In order to appear to be successful, it's very expensive. Epstein, at least at one point, borrowed a jacket that said the Concorde on it to convey the impression that he flew on the Concorde, which is the most expensive plane ticket in the world.
He soon sets his sights on his next mark, a well-known billionaire.
Leslie Wexner is a retailing tycoon who owns a company that owns a lot of the stores you'll see in an American shopping mall, from Victoria's Secret to The Limited, Structure, Abercrombie & Fitch.
Les Wexner had fired some financial guy, and he needed a replacement. And somebody recommended Jeffrey Epstein.
Wexner trusted Epstein with the running of his investment funds, his trust funds, his foundations. Epstein was the fixer.
Soon, Wexner grants Epstein full power of attorney, which allows Epstein to make financial decisions for Wexner.
Jeffrey Epstein is overseeing, in that 1 year alone, almost $250 million of stock transactions for Wexner, which is about $475 million today. In that year, Jeffrey Epstein is in a one-bedroom apartment. He suddenly buys an airplane. He hires a full-time pilot. He starts liquidating large amounts of Leslie Wexner stock holdings. And shortly after all these stock transactions, Epstein, like clockwork, will purchase a ranch, purchase an island.
One of the biggest issues is if you have too much money, most likely you won't miss it if some is taken from you. That's very important. You become the perfect victim for frauds and identity theft.
Working for Leslie Wexner, Epstein is suddenly showered with hot and cold running money. And in 1995, Wexner bestows upon his financial advisor a magnificent gift, a $70 million Manhattan mansion.
It was rags to riches in 24 hours. Few people with that kind of trajectory in history and lack of formal education get these kind of opportunities, which goes back to the question, why in fact did Leslie Wexner trust a man who was fired from the investment house with $1 billion? That's a lot of money.
However he got so rich, Epstein did build a massive power base of wealth and personal connections so he could live his life any way he wanted and squash anybody who got in his way.
Federal authorities in Florida quietly work the case for 2 years, an investigation that barely makes the news. They find 40 victims claiming they were forced into Epstein's sex trafficking ring. Then, the financier turns up in the Palm Beach County Courthouse.
This doesn't make any sense at all. None of the alleged victims are present. And if he's still under a federal investigation, then what on earth is he doing in a state courthouse?
Despite the massive amount of evidence of sex trafficking, Epstein is somehow given a remarkable deal.
The U.S. Attorney's Office and Epstein's lawyers enter into a sweetheart deal, which is called the non-prosecution agreement.
He agrees to 1 count of felony prostitution and 1 count of soliciting a minor.
There's no such thing as a child prostitute. If you're 14, you are not a prostitute. You are a child. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. It's ridiculous calling them prostitutes. They're a victim of sex trafficking.
On June 30th, 2008, Epstein agrees to an 18-month sentence after U.S. Attorney Acosta agrees to drop all federal charges.
The non-prosecution agreement gives immunity to not only Epstein, but all potential co-conspirators, which was unbelievable to us as lawyers at the time.
This is where it gets really ugly. In conversations with the authorities, Epstein's lawyers actually make the case not to tell the victims about any of it, not to involve them. Nothing. They hear nothing.
Acosta apparently agrees, despite the fact that the decision could be in violation of the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act. The secret plan to exclude the victims is not reported in the press until after it's all done.
The victims, they're supposed to be told about any plea deals or any type of sentencing and have some kind of input, whether real or symbolic. And they were totally kept in the dark about everything.
95% of cases end in plea bargains. And back in 2008, I thought, I'll give Acosta the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't have victims who were willing to testify at trial, for example, which is often a big hurdle. However, what we've learned since then from the victims themselves is no, they actually did want to testify. The victims were willing to fight. They were willing to go on the record, and they were not even contacted as the law required to get their approval.
The only reason that Epstein got the deal he got was because of his money, his power, and his influence. You take any other person off the street, and they're accused of molestation or sexual abuse of one girl. They end up behind bars for 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
This is inexcusable. And by the way, prosecutors generally work very closely with victims. Why would you not even contact them? It's just heartbreaking how that all went down, and it's shameful.
In 25 years, I'd never seen a non-prosecution agreement that broad. The only thing we could rationalize in our mind was that maybe the US government was getting something out of this deal. Maybe he was an informant. It was during the huge financial crisis and the stock market crash. So maybe he was giving information to the federal government for prosecutions of financial crimes. We had heard that he was maybe an informant working with the Israeli government, and that's why they treated him the way they did. We never truly learned the reason why they backed down the way they did.
A deeper dive into Epstein's history might provide clues as to how he became so powerful, so fast. The boy from Coney Island doesn't exactly fit in with the high society crowd.
He was always just trying to build himself up. Jeffrey Epstein was definitely insecure. And I think he needed all this aggrandizement because really he was born a simple guy.
It was in the early 1990s that Jeffrey Epstein meets Ghislaine Maxwell, and she is his ticket to high society.
Ghislaine Maxwell, she was a socialite. She was very well known, followed by the British tabloids. And she is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was a press baron in the United Kingdom. He owned the Daily Mirror group of newspapers. And so he was a very wealthy, connected person. He named his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, after his favorite daughter.
Ghislaine, as a young girl, she had a very wealthy life. She was part of one of the richest families in Britain at the time, and she really had whatever she'd wanted.
I'm Laura Goldman, and in the 90s, when I met Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, I was a stockbroker. Ghislaine is a very accomplished woman, went to Oxford. She speaks several languages. Basically, you would see Ghislaine at the opening of everything. If there was a gold envelope, she was there. She was part of the scene. She liked to party. She was a good time girl.
My name is Christina Oxenberg. I'm a writer by trade. I am a cousin of Prince Andrew. And in 1990, I met Ghislaine in America at a super ritzy party. And I was there with my husband, and they knew each other. And so as she walked over and he said, "Oh, Ghislaine, hello." She did a bizarre little performance. She looked at me and she looped her arm in his and she said, "Who is that?" I was getting ready to divorce this guy anyway, so I thought it was quite funny.
Ghislaine was living the good life, bouncing between London and New York. And then it all came crashing down.
In 1991, Robert Maxwell was sailing a yacht in the Canary Islands and he drowned.
His body was found by the Spanish Navy, and there's conflicting information about exactly how he died.
Robert Maxwell was on his yacht. He either fell over, attempted suicide, or was murdered.
A conspiracy theory arises as to why he might have been killed.
I know from Jewish sources that Robert Maxwell was a spy for Israel. And many people have also told me that he possibly sold information to other governments.
Some believe his secret life might have led to his demise. Others think the impending discovery of shocking crimes might have led to suicide.
After he died, it was discovered that he had robbed his own employees' pension funds to prop up his businesses.
Ghislaine believes he was murdered. She doesn't believe that he would have ever committed suicide.
When Maxwell's global media empire collapses, Ghislaine flees the UK media frenzy for New York in hopes of reclaiming her status.
I think the death of her father affected her in every possible way, especially financially. She lost her money. She felt she lost her identity. Ghislaine calls me and invites me to a tea party at her apartment, and her behavior is bizarre. She just simply was dressed in white bra and her underwear, very pretty underwear, but underwear, and 3 other girls. We're all dressed. She's very chatty, and she's saying that she's broke, and I think she thought I would be of some use to her.
A close friend of hers introduces her to Jeffrey Epstein at a dinner, and that's where their relationship begins.
Epstein had just really hit pay dirt in terms of managing Leslie Wexner's money. So Ghislaine comes over, and they appear to be dating.
By now, Ghislaine knows everybody, and she introduced him to everybody. Her entire network.
Ghislaine has a way, people call it charm, I would call it theater. And she's working constantly to make you laugh, make you comfortable, draw you in. She is the grifter, 100% grifter, and she's fairly good at it. And Jeffrey had like a list, like a wish list of the type of person he wanted brought in.
She introduces him to the Duke of York, Prince Andrew. And it's right around that time that he's starting to cozy up with the likes of Bill Clinton and one very wealthy and powerful playboy and real estate mogul in New York, Donald Trump.
Ghislaine Maxwell has very deep political ties. She was invited to President Bill Clinton's daughter Chelsea's wedding. She was a friend of President Donald Trump. She was a social networker at the rich and famous level at the top of the game. She was an unusual asset for Jeffrey Epstein. Unusual. Extraordinary.
Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are frequent visitors to Mar-a-Lago, a resort that Donald Trump owned and turned into a club.
Soon, Maxwell moves into Epstein's 71st Street mansion. Over time, Epstein and Maxwell's relationship evolves from dating and networking into something more sinister.
Maxwell became the mistress of the house. She would also procure the girls that she felt he would like.
He's been hiding his sexual proclivities from, the people he doesn't want to know. But at the same time, he's wriggling his way into the upper echelons of New York society, toast of the town. At one point, he even became a board member of the New York Academy of Art.
My name is Maria Farmer. I am the first person who reported Jeffrey Epstein to local authorities and the FBI. In the 1990s, I was in graduate school in Manhattan at the New York Academy of Art. It had been a dream of mine my entire life, not only to live in Manhattan, but to be an artist, a painter in New York City.
In 1995, Maria meets Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at an Academy event.
They have a graduation, and everyone puts their paintings up, and it's kind of a gallery exhibit. It was the only time I got to hang my paintings in a gallery.
Epstein zeroes in on one of Maria's paintings, which features a young girl on a couch with a man watching her.
Maria explains that the model for this piece of art was her little sister, Annie.
I had no idea who they were. Jeffrey said that he didn't typically appreciate beautiful work, but he found my work both compelling and beautiful. He said with my work, he appreciated it because it would get him thinking.
The wealthy financier makes a cut-rate offer, half the price.
He struck me as very cheap to ask for a discount from a student. But Jeffrey said, I'm giving you a great opportunity. With the discount you offer me, I'm going to be giving you the best opportunity.
Epstein offers the struggling art student a job.
He said, show up at 8 o'clock in the morning at the mansion.
Maria's new job, receptionist.
My only duty was to sign people in and sign them out as they left. Elan came in and she gave me all the instructions as to how to behave and how to speak to people and breathe, basically. She was also the one who was first showing me all the pinhole cameras next to the desk. I mean, he was very silly about it too and very proud of this, but right next to my head were several little pinhole cameras. I saw a lot of children coming in, a lot of children, little girls. I remember thinking, how can this many young girls be coming and going? What is the deal? Ghislaine said, they're Victoria's Secret models, Maria. And I believed her. Why would I not believe her, right? I mean, I know nothing about modeling. I know about art.
Soon Maria realizes working a billionaire's front desk isn't exactly her dream job.
I mean, here I was, I just received a master's degree in painting, and this job really made no sense for me. And I stayed with it for months because I was just destitute.
Then Epstein begins asking about Maria's family.
Maria Farmer has a 15-year-old sister, Annie Farmer, and Epstein and Maxwell get giddy and excited about this, and they want to meet her. So they represent to the mother that there's going to be like a scholarly conference for aspiring college students, and that they want to help Annie pay for college and that she should travel abroad so that she can get the type of resume that would look good to an Ivy League college.
I did not know that he was evil. I just didn't see it.
She worked at that unrewarding front desk job for several months, but then she got a fateful phone call. She got a job offer to do a series of paintings for a Hollywood movie.
I said, I no longer want to work for you at this desk. I got a new job doing these paintings. I didn't really have the space in my apartment, but I was going to make it work. But instead, Jeffrey said, you know what? I have an incredible house on my friend's property. He gave it to me. It's Les Wexner's house. You can stay there and paint. I thought this might be a really good experience. That was the beginning of the worst time of my life. And I was never safe again.
In the summer of 1996, Maria Farmer sets up her art studio at an Epstein home nestled on the property of Les Wexner, the billionaire CEO of L Brands and Victoria's Secret.
Jeffrey said, this is where the Victoria's Secret models stay, totally safe and beautiful.
According to Maria, what starts as a dream chance to finally focus on her art quickly becomes a nightmare. Maria makes serious allegations against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
There are pinhole cameras throughout that house in New Albany. And I know this for a fact because Ghislaine and Jeffrey told me. And they also wanted to make it really clear that I was being watched. Jeffrey and Ghislaine came to visit a couple times at the estate one night. Ghislaine called me in and she asked me to come with she and Jeffrey for a second, that Jeffrey needed to talk to me. And so I walked just down this hallway. This room I was never allowed to go in because it was Jeffrey's room. Ghislaine was in a robe and she walked me around the 4-poster bed and she wanted me to rub his feet. And I remember him moaning and being very dramatic. And so I said, I think I'm not very good at this. He put his hand like this and started farming me, like on my chest. And she went like this and mirrored him. So they were both like twisting me on my chest, and it was really strange, and I felt really uncomfortable and embarrassed, right? And at one point I started, like, tears started coming out, and she took my hand and was like rubbing it and being all disgusting and, like, you know, kissed my hand. And I remember thinking she was so disgusting. And that was for me the greatest moment of horror
Maria says she managed to run away and hide in her bedroom.
I remember thinking that, I was going to die too, and thinking about my mother and how my mom was going to handle this.
The next morning, Epstein and Maxwell leave early for the airport.
Jeffrey called me to tell me he'd had a great time the night before. And I just started sobbing, and I'm like, I quit. I hung up. Ghislaine called and was screaming at me. I was able to fight my way out of there. I remember driving out of the gates and thinking, I have just escaped hell. And I just got out of there. And I couldn't believe I was alive.
Much to her horror, Maria says she learns that she's not the only family member who has allegedly been assaulted by the couple.
Earlier that summer, Maria says Ghislaine and Jeffrey had flown Maria's little sister Annie to New Mexico, to his ranch. And the idea was, they told her, that she would join a group of students there to do some college planning.
But when she gets there, there's no other students that are there. Maria finds out that Annie was sexually assaulted by Epstein and Maxwell.
I don't know how to explain this, but she is my whole world. I went to her and I said, we need to go to the police.
So Maria Farmer returns to New York and reports to a police precinct near Epstein's house about what Epstein had done to her assault. And the police tell her, well, this might actually be a case for the FBI.
I reported to the FBI that night. I reported they'd trafficked my sister, and I thought, I can't let this happen.
But nothing ever seems to actually happen with any of these reports. It's unclear what type of follow-up or investigation ever actually occurred.
Even in 1996, did Jeffrey Epstein have the power to quash a federal investigation? Nearly a decade later, the Teflon financier continues his ascent and deepens his connections to major players.
He came on the scene very quickly with like a bolt of lightning. All of a sudden, he was there, and he had all this money, and he was taking everybody on his private plane.
President Clinton was looking for someone to fly him to Africa on a private jet, and Jeffrey agrees to take the president. Kevin Spacey was on that trip, Chris Tucker, comedian, was on that trip, Ghislaine Maxwell, and several other girls were on that trip.
In 2002, the editor of Vanity Fair, Graydon Carter, is intrigued with Jeffrey Epstein. He wants to know, who is this guy and how did he make all this money? And he asks one of his star correspondents and writers, Vicky Ward, to dig in, do the story, and research how this guy got to where he was.
In her reporting, Ward discovers the criminal complaints Maria and Annie Farmer filed.
Vanity Fair contacted me, and they really, really wanted to do an article about Jeffrey Epstein, and they knew everything. Vicky Ward knew everything that had happened to me. She knew all the bad things. She knew enough to know this was a very dangerous man. And she knew that he had harmed my sister, who was 16.
When Vicky Ward was working on her story, I guess she had asked Jeffrey about Maria Farmer and her sister, and that's when Jeffrey went full blast to try and stop the story. Jeffrey somehow got into Vanity Fair's office one day, and it was unnerving, to say the least. Vicky was pregnant when she was doing the story with twins, and he said he was going to put a curse on her. It frightened her for whatever reason.
In the end, Epstein's campaign to drop Maria and Annie Farmer from the article works.
Jeffrey said to Graydon, take out the women. And Graydon did. I wouldn't have, but Graydon did.
I gave up everything for the truth. All I wanted was for people to know the truth. And I found that most people do not want to hear the truth in this case. I remember thinking that this guy, he could get away with anything.
Now, Maria is terrified. She leaves New York, leaves the art world, and goes into hiding. It'll be another decade before her voice is heard. But for Jeffrey Epstein, he's just getting started.
Jeffrey Epstein begins his 18-month sentence. As part of the sweetheart deal his lawyers made with U.S. attorney Alexander Acosta.
He's allowed out on work release during the day to go to an office where we now know he's meeting with other people on his staff, which included young girls. And then he goes back to sleep at the jail at night.
This convicted child sex offender is still being granted access to young girls, all while he's supposed to be in prison serving a sentence. It's like it was just business as usual for Jeffrey Epstein.
I mean, this was not hard time. No.
In July 2009, Epstein is released early on good behavior.
Once his sentence is over, he's secreted out of jail, no one knows about it, and he gets to go home.
His lawyers work to reduce his legal restrictions.
They argued that Jeffrey shouldn't be put on the sexual offender list. I was there in court. And the judge came out and said, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, thank God it was a legitimate judge, but how could you?
It was later discovered that Mr. Epstein continued molesting young girls even after he was allowed out of jail here in South Florida, and that there were additional victims up in the New York area.
The federal government should have charged Epstein with, at the time, sex trafficking, and by not doing so, they allowed Epstein to continue to prey on women for another 12 years.
Since Epstein was not held accountable in criminal court, some of his victims turned to the civil courts in search of justice.
Several of the attorneys representing the victims begin to file civil cases against Epstein for restitution on behalf of their clients.
Would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, I do.
Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
He essentially pled the fifth to every question that was asked of him.
Leslie Wexner fires him formally, but Epstein's already made enough money and has all the contacts in the world he needed. And so he begins to fix his reputation.
My name is R. Corey Hay. I am a publicist and columnist and reporter in New York City. So I wear a couple different hats. The publicist is brought in to tell the story of the client. So it's about repairing your reputation if it's repairable. As a gossip columnist, I've always had my ear to the ground, so to speak. So I would hear odd stories about Jeffrey.
Epstein reaches out to Hay, seeking advice.
I would never have worked for Jeffrey Epstein. I only went to see that house, to put on my reporter's hat and get a story. On the first visit, we walked out of the office and up some stairs and back to a very grand baronial room. There was Jeffrey seated at the end, quite imperious with his fabulous gray hair and not dressed up, no suit, no tie. And he's quite disarming and charming. Basically, he said he was unhappy that all the stories about him started with Jeffrey Epstein's a billionaire pedophile. So he said, I'm just tired of reading stories that start this way. And I looked up at the chandelier, and there was a blow-up doll in it, a sex doll. Okay. It was getting weirder and weirder, but even I was sucked in. It was fascinating. So I went, well, Jeffrey, you got to go to Bill Gates and Melinda immediately and pledge your entire fortune. You need to give $1.5 billion immediately, outright, not after your death. Give it right now. Then I said you had to go into professional rehab for 1 year. He looked at me like, 1 year? I said, 1 year. One of the sex clinics where he could get real help.
In the end, Epstein doesn't take most of the advice, and Mr. Hay is glad he didn't.
I'm not interested in getting Jeffrey Epstein off the hook because these girls, they'll never be off the hook.
Epstein does try one new tack.
He began recreating himself, calling himself a philanthropist, interested in the sciences and in education. He gave Harvard $6 million in total, and everybody bought that hook, line, and sinker. MIT, Stanford, I mean, even Bill Gates invested $2 million on behalf of Epstein.
Now, people are ashamed they took the money, but they took it because the world runs on money.
He was accepted back in society here in New York, which is disgraceful.
Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, a long line of important people. They were all still friendly with Jeffrey after his conviction.
And then Epstein starts getting invitations to scientific conferences and high society parties with bold-faced names like Katie Couric, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk. He is still the convicted pedophile billionaire, but nobody seems to care. Epstein's masterful ability to manipulate celebrities and power brokers continues uninterrupted. Would anything stop him from terrorizing more young girls?
When Jeffrey Epstein reemerges onto the New York social scene, he quickly reconnects with a powerful old friend, His Royal Highness, Prince Andrew.
Jeffrey's out a year or so. He's in New York, and he and Prince Andrew are caught strolling around Central Park. Not a good look.
Prince Andrew in the late 80s was really seen as a party boy. Tabloids called him Randy Andy, someone who was a womanizer. You know, he said he was loved beautiful women and had a lot of girlfriends, had a lot of dates, had a lot of parties. And I think under it all was really the expectation of Andrew that women would fall at his feet, that women would see him and be absolutely fascinated by him. We know that Ghislaine introduced Epstein to Prince Andrew not long after she arrived in New York City, and that they started spending more and more time together, Epstein and Prince Andrew, in the early 2000s. And we start to see Epstein being invited to royal parties and royal properties. Jeffrey Epstein was really introduced to the British public in 2010 with a bang. That was really shocking because what was Andrew doing walking with this convicted pedophile in New York City?
Things really take a turn in 2011 when a photo of the prince and a young girl surfaces in the UK press. It was allegedly taken at Ghislaine Maxwell's flat in London. And the girl is Virginia Roberts, who claims to have entered Epstein's sordid world at the age of 15 by unhappy accident.
Virginia Roberts' father worked at Mar-a-Lago, and so he gets her a job there.
So Ghislaine and Epstein are having lunch at Mar-a-Lago, and Ghislaine walks into the ladies' room, and Virginia Roberts is the bathroom attendant, working part-time.
So Maxwell's like, oh, wow, are you interested in massage? I know this wealthy man who, you know, he might actually pay for you to be trained as a masseuse. And Virginia Roberts is like, wow, this is great. I could get like a professional license.
So Ghislaine then introduces her to Epstein that afternoon.
Virginia says she agreed to meet Maxwell and Epstein at his Palm Beach mansion the same day.
Virginia Roberts' father dropped her off there. It was his understanding that Ghislaine Maxwell would be kind of like chaperoning and overseeing his daughter. And so when Virginia goes up, she's a little bit weirded out by like, why is this guy laying in a towel? And she's like, okay, must be how massage therapy as a profession it works. It's Maxwell is basically massaging Epstein and showing her, do it like this, rub him like this. And then Epstein at some point flips over and she is sexually assaulted, and Maxwell is there the whole time. And at the end, they pay her a couple $100 and say, you did great, and when can you come back?
Virginia says she was sexually abused in the past, and I think that may have set her up as easy prey for a predator like Epstein. She would later say that she came to believe during this time that this was normal. The lifestyle with Epstein was the way life was just supposed to be. Pretty sad.
He grooms her, which is what these traffickers do. They groom you, first to trust them, to believe that they're the only ones who are going to take care of you, to love you, to protect you.
And then over a period of time, she was sort of like a long-term employee who was then pimped out to other rich, powerful men around the world.
he begins to loan her out to his rich male friends. And so one of them happens to be, according to Virginia, Prince Andrew.
Jeffrey Epstein's plane was nicknamed the Lolita Express, named after Nabokov's famous novel Lolita, in which a college professor has sex with a 12-year-old girl.
Photos of the plane's luxurious interior were taken when the Lolita Express was put up for sale. They later surfaced in the tabloids.
Ghislaine told me proudly the private plane that she and Jeffrey Epstein used was wired for audio and video. She was more than hinting that the purpose of this was blackmail to insulate themselves, to protect themselves.
I bet Jeffrey saved the videotapes because he enjoyed looking at them. He was probably a voyeur. He was clearly a pervert. And then, of course, there was that backup. You could use those tapes as leverage if you got in trouble.
There's a flight manifest, and her name is on flights all over the world. But at some point, I think it was March of 2001, there's a series of flights into Europe that Virginia Roberts is on Epstein's plane. And one of the flights lands at London's Luton Airport. According to Virginia, Ghislaine Maxwell takes her out shopping, dresses her up. And it's like, oh, you're going to meet a prince tonight.
And then we get in the car, and Ghislaine tells me in the car that I have to do what I do for Jeffrey for Prince Andrew. And that's when I learned what was going to happen.
And to Virginia Roberts, she's like, oh my God, even these royal people are just as sick and depraved as he is. But she basically goes out dancing with him.
When we went to Club Tramp, and he danced with me, and he sweats a lot, and he smells funny. And that's the very first time I met him. And that's right before I was abused by him.
My client is a London woman who recalls seeing Prince Andrew and Virginia Roberts together at that London nightclub in 2001, just as Virginia Roberts says. Prince Andrew was smiling, happy, having a great time. Virginia was not. Virginia looked very sullen and quiet.
According to Virginia's legal filings, on Epstein's order, she had sex with the prince.
You cannot say no to these people. And of course, there is sadness, there is anger, there's scars that will never heal, ever. You're not even acknowledged as being alive or there or important or cared for or worried about in any way. None of those human emotions were attached to me when I was trafficked to Prince Andrew.
Prince Andrew denies all of these allegations, but Virginia Roberts also states in legal filings that she's had sexual encounters with other associates of Jeffrey Epstein's. One of the most notable, Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz denied the allegations too, and because of that, Virginia Roberts sued him for defamation. And in a totally bizarre turn, he sued her right back.
Did you ever see Mr. Epstein with underage girls?
No. Oh, no. If I had ever seen Jeffrey Epstein in any inappropriate situation with an underage girl, I would have terminated my relationship and turned him in. No way. This is a woman with a long, long record of lying for money.
I was always disgusted that there were so many people involved. It was the elite of the world. It was people who run the world. It was the most powerful people in the world.
Finally, after 3 years of alleged abuse, Virginia manages to escape Epstein's grasp.
Epstein had proposed to her that she give him a child. And so he sends her to Thailand to bring back a 12-year-old.
Virginia goes to Thailand, but the thought of procuring a 12-year-old girl for Epstein gives her the strength to escape.
She meets this young man, and they fall in love instantly, and they instantly marry. And she calls Epstein from Thailand and says, I'm never coming back. For a number of years, she went into hiding until she received a phone call from the FBI.
The FBI approached Virginia Roberts concerning Epstein when they were doing their investigation, and she handed over the photograph to the FBI.
Virginia files a defamation suit against Ghislaine Maxwell and a civil suit seeking damages against her as well.
Despite battling numerous civil suits from victims following his release from jail, Jeffrey Epstein manages to fade from public view until a series of events in 2017 plunges him back into the spotlight.
The nominee for Secretary of the Department of Labor will be Mr. Alex Acosta.
Alexander Acosta is the one who'd signed off on that controversial non-prosecution agreement back in 2007.
Alex Acosta was the Florida U.S. attorney that ripped up a 54-page indictment that would have put Jeffrey Epstein in prison for life, in federal prison, for sex trafficking and raping of the underage girls. Jeffrey Epstein got a slap on the wrist. That can't be done.
Everybody looked the other way. Not only his staff, but government officials looked the other way. And newspaper editors and networks and everyone looked the other way for many years.
They totally failed these girls. It's just so upsetting how they failed these girls.
Now that the world is coming to a realization of really what's, happening by powerful men, by wealthy men, abusing young women and taking advantage of young women.
Acosta's appointment piques the interest of an investigative reporter from the Miami Herald, Julie K. Brown.
Julie had been a champion in reporting on women's issues, and she was definitely aware of Jeffrey Epstein and the sweetheart deal that Acosta had signed off on in Florida back in 2007.
You got to put this in perspective with respect to the time. So you're looking at 2007. This was a time and an age where the Me Too movement didn't exist. Bill Cosby was still America's dad. Harvey Weinstein was still a wonderful producer in Hollywood.
Outraged by the NPA and empowered by the recent Me Too movement, Julie Brown embarks on her own investigation of Epstein's sex trafficking charges.
She got the entire unredacted Palm Beach Police Department file on Jeffrey Epstein. She also got statements from the witnesses that no one had ever seen before because they'd been under court seal.
Yeah, I had been just curious about where are these girls now and what do they think about this deal? And how did this affect their lives?
Brown tracks down over 60 victims, including many who had interviewed with Palm Beach police earlier. Brown compiles her research into a comprehensive 3-part series for the Miami Herald in November 2018.
It's an explosive investigative series by the Miami Herald. The title is Perversion of Justice.
While the 2007 Palm Beach investigation really, for the most part, flew under the radar of the national press, Julie's reporting on Epstein's crimes and then that subsequent sweetheart deal, well, that ignited a powder keg in 2018.
The attention prompts the FBI to reopen its investigation, compile evidence and witness testimony, and this time, act.
July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein takes off around 9 o'clock in the morning from Paris and lands in Teterboro, New Jersey around 4:30 to 5 o'clock. It's at that point that his life changes. An NYPD FBI joint task force has a clandestine operation set up at the airport by surprise.
He was arrested the moment he landed for solicitation of child sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit child sex trafficking.
United States Attorney Geoffrey Berman announced the indictment against Jeffrey Epstein, the politically connected financier now facing up to 45 years in prison on child sex trafficking charges.
The Southern District of New York established that the arrest was based solely on the enormous media attention that occurred, because the media did not let go of what took place. The Southern District of New York's press conferences said, we had to arrest him. The media showed us so much evidence of the crimes of this man in New York, Florida, sex trafficking around the world. We had to arrest him. We had to stop him. We couldn't have let this man continue on this road that was getting worse and worse and worse. They wanted to shut him down. Jeffrey Epstein was taken to the federal prison in New York City, the Metropolitan Correctional Center.
You don't see any entrances of how to get to it, how to drive up to it, and it's almost like a forgotten world.
Mice, rats. You might have to chase a rat off your body when you're sleeping. It's got sewage leakage. The temperature is very cold. You're not allowed to have like a nice soft pillow or blanket. The lights might be blaring at you. Other prisoners might be wanting to do you in. So it's really much different than what Epstein was used to. Epstein was used to controlling every inch of his comfort. When people think of federal prisons, they call it club fed, but these prisons aren't exactly nice. I've done a little bit of research on this. The suicide rate in 2016 started edging up very high, in part because the conditions are so poor. It's cold, there's vermin, there's understaffing issues, there's equipment issues. I'm pretty sure the bathroom in his airplane was larger than the cell he was occupying.
The whole situation was surreal to him, to be locked up like this, in a place like this. He'd never been exposed to something like this before.
News of Epstein's arrest ramps up scrutiny on the financier's many powerful friends.
After Epstein's arrest in 2019, Bill Gates said publicly that he had no business or personal relationship with Epstein. However, it has been reported that Gates was seen at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse several times in those final years.
Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's plane several times.
And Ghislaine Maxwell in 2010 at Chelsea's wedding. And so there's quite a relationship there.
But a spokesperson for Bill Clinton said that the former president has not even spoken to Jeffrey Epstein in well over a decade.
Now, lots of reporters are digging in, and pretty soon, a scandalous 1992 video from a party at Mar-a-Lago surfaces.
Trump alternates between dancing and pointing out women to Epstein. Trump gestures to one and appears to say to Epstein, "Look at her back there. She's hot."
In the video, it is crystal clear. You can see Jeffrey Epstein right up next to Donald Trump, and the two of them together are gawking and groping young women. And frankly, it's just appalling.
Donald Trump gets peppered with questions about Jeffrey Epstein, and he kind of distances himself from Epstein.
I haven't spoken to him in probably 15 years or more. I wasn't a big fan of Jeffrey Epstein, that I can tell you.
This is a far cry from Donald Trump's statement in 2002 praising Jeffrey Epstein as a terrific guy.
The reality was that Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump were close for a number of years.
But the heat wasn't just on Donald Trump. It was also on his newly minted Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta. Acosta, the architect of that 2007 sweetheart deal in Florida.
Acosta hands in his resignation only a few days after Epstein is arrested.
It would be selfish for me to stay in this position
and continue talking about a case that's 12 years old rather than about the amazing economy we have right now.
President Trump saying today he still supports Acosta.
I'm with him. He's a tremendous talent. He's a Hispanic man. He went to Harvard.
It was a pretty flip way to refer to the abuse of dozens of girls, right? Calling it a case that's 12 years old. And the fact that neither of them actually expressed any sympathy for these girls, these kids, it just seemed really unsettling.
Jeffrey Epstein had asked me to formally take over the case. I said to him that I would do it because I wanted to help him on the case, and he was very upbeat and excited about the strategies that we had discussed. He was looking forward to fighting his case.
Epstein was an arrogant man. He felt that he was not only above the law in every way, he believed that he was smarter than most other people. He believed he could buy everything and everyone.
Will he give up the names of the powerful men he allegedly serviced with underage girls?
One of the options that's going to be potentially available to him is cooperation.
One would have to imagine that a lot of Epstein's powerful friends were squirming at this point. They had to wonder, would Epstein give up their secrets to save himself?
The 66-year-old multi-millionaire hedge fund manager, Jeffrey Epstein, was found unresponsive in his cell Saturday morning.
Jeffrey Epstein's death is all over every television network that you can imagine.
One source tells CBS News Epstein hanged himself.
I was shocked. Suicide didn't seem likely to me. He was planning to fight the case, clear his name. I knew there would be a medical examination immediately. So I suggested that the family send in an independent medical examiner. I've done this before. I suggested Michael Baden. I think he's one of the best in the world.
My name is Cyril H. Weck. I am a forensic pathologist. I have been studying the Epstein case since I was first contacted by my colleague, Dr. Michael Baden. Dr. Baden has a wealth of experience, including cases involving hangings in jails. He attended the autopsy as the official representative of the Epstein family.
6 days later, the state medical examiner releases the autopsy results.
The chief medical examiner ruled the manner of death as suicide. I think that people have understandable suspicions given the background of Jeffrey Epstein.
Dr. Michael Baden goes public with his own conclusion.
Well, I was asked by the brother, the next of kin, to be at the autopsy. And at the autopsy on day one, there were findings that were unusual for suicidal hanging.
Several aspects of Epstein's death are troubling to the renowned pathologist, beginning with what was found inside Epstein's prison cell.
If you look at the photographs, the postmortems of his jail cell, and you look at how many bed sheets were inside that cell, he's given tens of bed sheets.
He's also got a sleep apnea machine with long electrical cords attached. Now remember, this is a man who they thought had attempted suicide just weeks earlier.
How in the world, if you have someone on suicide watch, would you allow those kinds of physical structures to be present in the cell? How do you think people hang themselves? So this is bothersome.
Examining Epstein's neck abrasions during the autopsy, Baden notices more peculiarities.
The mark around the neck of a person who has been strangled or who has hanged himself is what we call a furrow.
Usually in hangings, the furrow mark is found up high in the neck, sort of right under the jawline. Because if you think about it, the noose slides up the neck as the weight of the body is pulled down.
It is important to see and note the furrow is significantly lower on Epstein's neck, which is quite rare in cases of a hanging.
In order for Jeffrey Epstein to die the way he died, under the autopsy results, he had to put the noose around his neck himself and had to hold the noose down to near his chest.
Low furrow marks like Epstein's are more commonly found in strangulation homicides. More doubt about a suicide emerges when Bodden looks under the skin.
There are multiple 3 fractures in the hyoid bone, the thyroid cartilage, that are very unusual for suicide and more indicative of strangulation, homicidal strangulation.
The hyoid bone is a relatively delicate, small, U-shaped bone high up in the neck, and the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple, that's below, lower down. And there were 3 fractures, one of the hyoid bone up high on the left side, and then 2 more fractures of the thyroid cartilage, one on each side.
Have you ever seen anyone that committed suicide and was hanging themselves with those 3 broken bones?
No. Hanging does not cause these broken bones, and homicide does.
You don't get hyoid bone fractures in cases of hanging. They're rare.
Dr. Bodden eventually said to me that in over 20,000 autopsies, he had never seen injuries like this consistent with a suicide, and therefore did not believe it was a suicide.
He believes this was manual strangulation, homicide.
Once Bodden went public with his conclusion that this was murder, it was like a tsunami was unleashed. There were conspiracy theories and memes about it exploding all over the internet.
And as you can imagine, in our political climate these days, everyone's theory had sort of a tone of accusing one political party or another.
The big question is this: who would most benefit from Epstein's demise?
A lot of people were probably happy that he's dead, because dead men tell no tales.
Jeffrey Epstein's death is raising troubling questions about how such a high-profile suspect could apparently take his own life while in custody. But it's also raising some conspiracy theories.
If it was murder, many suspect shadowy forces in the U.S. government.
All of Jeffrey's troubles second time around began when Trump appoints Acosta to his cabinet, because the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York started investigating for that non-prosecution agreement given to Jeffrey Epstein.
There was a peculiar aspect to the Epstein arrest at Teterboro that was barely reported. He was not arrested by agents of the FBI with the Child Exploitation Unit. It was agents from the Government Corruption Unit that handcuffed him.
So that suggested to me that there was a political angle to this thing. And there has been a great deal of talk about the prominent political friends Jeffrey Epstein had and other wealthy friends.
So was this arrest really about going after Jeffrey's crimes? Or was this arrest more about going after potential corruption and government officials who helped him weasel out of those crimes?
I believe that Epstein was killed. And I believe that if he was not, he would have talked. And he would have pointed fingers at everyone he needed to point at fingers, including government officials who looked the other way.
Others, however, wonder if some of the elites Epstein associated with wanted to silence him due to information he might have on them.
We know that he had numerous visitors to his homes. There are accounts of young girls that worked within the home that saw the cameras, that saw the recording systems, that he bragged to those girls about the recording systems.
Many people also wonder if Epstein's private jet, called the Lolita Express, was used as part of a blackmail scheme.
The flight logs that we looked at
proved that Jeffrey Epstein was flying with underage girls.
In 1997, Ghislaine says to me, the plane is wired for video and audio. She volunteers this information. Why does she say this to me? One thing that I know for sure is that if you're filming your friends and they don't know about it, you're not their friend.
If any of that surveillance got out, it would be incredibly embarrassing.
There are many powerful people whose secrets might have died with Epstein. But one notorious friendship steals the world's attention even before Epstein's death.
According to Virginia Roberts, she was paid $15,000 to service Prince Andrew. And she services Prince Andrew 3 times in 3 different cities: New York, London, and then the United States Virgin Islands.
Once the press heard about Virginia's allegations against Prince Andrew, they went nuts.
The speculations about Jeffrey Epstein's friendship with Prince Andrew is increasingly condemnatory. The royal family are held to a higher level of scrutiny. They are expected to be greater in terms of their behavior. They're not just hanging around with someone who's unsavory. What on earth is he doing?
After Epstein's death, Prince Andrew takes to the airwaves in an effort to clear his name.
I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year. But it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend.
Prince Andrew decides that the way to sort all of this out is to give an interview to the Newsnight programme, a BBC programme which is known for its forensic questioning of politicians.
I mean, yes, I would go and stay in his house, but that was because of his girlfriend.
Andrew said he didn't regret his friendship with Epstein because through Epstein, he'd been introduced to so many interesting people.
The people that I met and the opportunities that I was given to learn, either by him or because of him, were actually very useful.
Prince Andrew is pressed about the incriminating photograph taken with then 17-year-old Virginia Roberts.
I can tell you categorically, I don't remember meeting her at all. I do not remember a photograph being taken. And I've said consistently and frequently that we never had any sort of sexual contact whatever.
Prince Andrew has his arms around her and Ghislaine Maxwell is in the background. And that photo really makes it clear that Virginia Roberts did meet Prince Andrew. She did meet him.
I admit fully that my judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable, but that's just the way it is.
Throughout an hour of interview, Prince Andrew never expressed any sympathy for Epstein's victims, for these young exploited girls who'd suffered so much.
That terrible interview was just excoriated by the press, especially the UK press.
People say he's not the brightest, and certainly if you saw that interview, you know he's not the brightest, okay? That he's arrogant and entitled.
Prince Andrew has to step back from royal duties, and it's the right thing for the royal family to do. How on earth could this man, who had been out socialising with a convicted paedophile, then go and represent the country?
After Epstein's death at the MCC, it has been reported that the FBI approached the prince. They wanted to interview him, and he publicly agreed to cooperate.
However, to date, the prince has not interviewed with the FBI. Those who believe it was murder point to compelling clues found among the financier's possessions.
After his arrest, the FBI raided his home in Manhattan on 71st Street.
They find troves of pictures of underage girls and nude pictures and possibly pictures with prominent people on them. Potential blackmail information that he had probably collected from his surveillance cameras.
They cracked open the safe, and the safe contained cash, I believe $70,000, diamonds, single diamonds.
To some, another item found in Epstein's safe seems to support the theory that he was connected to international intelligence.
Inside the safe, they also find a passport with his picture.
It was issued by Austria.
It's well known that spies use foreign passports. So the question became, is it possible that Jeffrey Epstein was co-opted by a foreign entity to spy on the rich and powerful and use a sex ring to get some pretty compromising information called, in the business, compromat?
We also know that because of his connections through Ghislaine Maxwell, that he possibly had high-level security information on behalf of governments throughout the world. And there could potentially be people that didn't want him talking about those connections and things that he knew. This is someone that a lot of people didn't want talking.
Although many believe the secret agent theory explains both Epstein's wealth and suspicious death, others find that idea absurd.
But I do know that he certainly was capable of blackmailing people. I don't think he was involved in any intelligence operations. Nonsense. Nonsense.
While there's no definitive proof Epstein had blackmail information on government officials or the super powerful, or that he was a spy, one question still remains.
If somebody killed him, how did they have access to his cell? How did they organize? This was an organized killing.
Amidst a sea of theories surrounding powerful figures who might have ordered Epstein's murder, the question is, who could have done it inside prison walls?
I think if my theory is right, it would have to be another inmate. Jeffrey told me that he was very concerned about being incarcerated there. People were constantly commenting about him.
Someone who is charged with the kinds of crimes that Jeffrey Epstein was charged with, fooling around with 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, is going to be persona non grata even to the most vile of other prisoners. This is going to be repulsive.
The question is, how'd someone get in and get out? Well, I've learned a great deal about what inmates, through their ingenuity, do and not do. People are very, very inventive in these situations.
Some close to Epstein quickly point a finger at a possible suspect.
Remember that first time that Jeffrey Epstein was suspected of attempting suicide and put on a suicide watch? At that time, he had a cellmate, a muscle-bound suspected murderer named Nicholas Tartaglione.
Tartaglione was a former cop, 240, 50 pounds, muscular, burly guy.
He was charged with 4 murders and is looking at a death sentence.
Epstein reportedly told his lawyers, who came to visit him almost every single day, that he was scared of Tartaglione.
He said that Tartaglione was on a mission to, quote, rough him up.
Jeffrey had some abrasions on his neck after the first incident, which nobody really ever figured out. Was it a suicide attempt, or was it his bunkie attacking him? I asked him, I said, what happened, Jeffrey, that night? And he said, I don't know, I got up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water. I don't remember anything after that.
According to Tartaglione's attorney, when Epstein tried to commit suicide the first time, that Tartaglione was the one who alerted all the guards and tried to save him.
And the strongest proof exonerating Tartaglione for Epstein's murder lies in his alibi.
Tartaglione had been transferred out of Epstein's cell after that first suicide attempt and before his death. And so the likelihood that somehow this big hulking guy could have made his way back to Jeffrey Epstein's cell, killed Epstein, and then slinked off into the, jail nighttime, it just doesn't sound reasonable.
Epstein's inmate suicide watch counselor, Bill Mercy, is one of the last people to have spoken with Epstein.
I probably spent 5 or 6 4-hour shifts in the presence of Jeffrey Epstein, with me watching him. He didn't talk about Prince Andrew or anybody else. He didn't really volunteer information. For a suicide inmate, he was pretty well adjusted. He wasn't a prima donna or a diva. He didn't complain. The only complaint I ever heard from him was they gave him the wrong laxative. He didn't strike me as depressed, but he was really apprehensive about prison life. He was scared. In the middle of conversations, his eyes would drift off like, oh my God, I'm in prison. Am I ever going to get out of here? Prison is not a fun place. You're in your cell 23 hours a day. You shower 3 times a week, and there's mice, and there's water bugs, and it's real noisy, and it's cold. It's a long way down from a $77 million mansion on the Upper East Side. There's no way somebody got in there and killed him. You know how many people you'd have to pay off to get in there and kill him? It's just, no way.
That said, some of the people that Jeffrey Epstein could have ruined with his secrets, they had plenty of money to pay anybody off.
One striking piece of anecdotal evidence that supports the theory of suicide can be found in the records of Epstein's vast wealth.
Epstein, 48 hours prior to him killing himself, if that's what happened, refiles and changes his will to be collapsed into a trust in the Virgin Islands. People in the Virgin Islands that are older, their lawyers advise them, don't file your estate or your will or your probate in the Virgin Islands, file it in the mainland because it'll take 9-10 years before people in your will see any of the benefits of that. So this will make it very difficult for victims to get any type of restitution from his estate.
Tying up all his money in international red tape, that very well might have been a final FU to his victims, if in fact he was planning to kill himself.
For all the conspiracy theorists out there about Jeffrey Epstein's suicide versus murder, this is what I say. You're the same guys who think that the moon landing was a fake. Don't be ridiculous. Get over it. He killed himself. You're tripping. There's no question about it in my mind. Case closed for me.
As far as how Epstein died, people either firmly believe he committed suicide or they strongly believe he was murdered. But there could be a third possibility. What if Epstein did in fact hang himself and he had help doing it?
Investigators and lawyers have more questions than answers about what happened inside that New York jail at dawn Saturday.
I think it was a homicide, but I don't know who killed him.
The simplest answer to me always rings true, and the simplest answer is he killed himself because he didn't want his secrets revealed.
I think he was ready to sing, and perhaps that's why he was murdered.
The Attorney General of the United States decides to weigh in on this case, William Barr. And he says that this was no murder. He says this was just a perfect storm of screw-ups within the prison system.
I was appalled, and indeed the whole department was, and frankly, angry to learn of the MCC's failure to adequately secure this prisoner.
But come on, Epstein was the most high-profile prisoner in the entire system at the time. What if these failures that Barr talked about weren't failures, but rather deliberate acts of incompetence that allowed Epstein to take his own life?
I do know that they put him on suicide watch. And then inexplicably, they took him off. Why? Why would you do that?
They released him within a week. That's absurd. Unheard of. Absurd.
He should have been on suicide watch. But somebody wanted him off who had the juice to make that happen.
He is now by himself. The very next day, we have Epstein found dead.
Epstein had extension cords in his cell block. He had sheets at his disposal.
And guess what? The 2 guards who were assigned to watch him on a 24-hour basis were so tired from being overworked that they fell asleep. It would be astronomical odds that you would have all of those things occur at that particular time in that fashion, especially in this kind of a federal prison. It seems like almost it was an invitation.
Like they were saying, please kill yourself. Here's all the stuff you need to do it.
Jeffrey Epstein was by far the most famous person in that jail at that time. Everybody was interested in what he was doing every minute of the day, everything he ate, everybody who came to visit him. And I'm very skeptical.
Maybe someone very powerful knew that Epstein was on the edge and then decided to just turn up the heat.
Even more shocking to some, the only individuals charged with crimes to date are those at the bottom of the jail's hierarchy, prison guards Michael Thomas and Tova Noel.
I'm Montel Figgins, the defense attorney for Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas and Ms. Noel were on duty at the time that Jeffrey Epstein was found to have died. After the death of Mr. Epstein, there was a huge investigation into how he died and what role the guards may have played in that. Mr. Thomas, as well as his co-defendant, Ms. Noel, they were indicted for making false statements in the logs regarding the checks and the rounds that they were supposed to do. But the system itself is what failed and allowed this to happen. The Bureau of Prisons didn't have enough people working. So the administrative officials were allowing many individuals to work multiple shifts in a row. Now, Mr. Thomas faces up to 5 years in jail. This is very rare that a guard would be charged with a criminal offense in this situation. It's my position that the guards in this case are being scapegoated.
I am outraged that the only 2 people who may go to jail in the entire Epstein affair are 2 African-American prison guards that were at MCC the night that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Maybe they should be suspended. Maybe they should be fired. But that they should go to jail? No. That's just not okay.
The question remains why everyone in upper level staff is able to keep their jobs, keep their pensions, not face any jail time.
We will get to the bottom of what happened, and there will be accountability.
But even Attorney General Barr has a bizarre connection to this case. Remember, his father was the headmaster of the Dalton School, that elite school in Manhattan where Jeffrey Epstein, got a job as teacher. And it just seems like everybody who was investigating Jeffrey Epstein had some weird, twisted connection to him, which begs the question, is this case ever going to actually be solved?
Another question is whether the financier's alleged co-conspirators will ever face justice.
Maxwell, she's in hiding somewhere. Nobody knows where she is. A lot of people would like to know where she is.
In 1997, or maybe it was 98, Guylaine told me very proudly that she'd got her helicopter license. And I said to her, why on earth would you want such a thing? So dangerous. Why would you do that? Why would you want that? And she said, for secrecy.
She's a fugitive now. Ghislaine Maxwell is a fugitive.
I would love to see justice in the form of every co-conspirator needs to be behind bars. They belong there. They're criminals.
Now that Jeffrey Epstein is dead and the investigation shrouded in mystery and doubt, many wonder what will become of the decade's most controversial saga.
The Epstein case goes from Palm Beach to New York to the White House to Buckingham Palace, where you have politicians, business leaders, opinion makers, very powerful people implicated in one way or another, is so expansive. It is a global case. It crosses the political barrier, and it is the longest running child sex trafficking case in U.S. legal history to date.
What's important about this story is the lawyers and the prosecutors and the U.S. attorney who let him off the hook. You can't have this in a society. And Acosta and Krisha, they should be held responsible for what they did.
What this case has, I think, shown is that we live in a society with two systems of justice, one for the rich and one for the poor. And Epstein knew this all along. Jeffrey knew that.
This is a story about the super rich and famous, not the rich and famous, the elite super rich and famous.
But it was more than money that helped Epstein fly under the radar for so many years.
Jeffrey Epstein's life is almost mysterious. Part of that's because he was a pathological liar, and he liked that. That was part of his power, was his mystique.
Jeffrey Epstein was a master criminal in thought process. He was Sherlock Holmes. The Jeffrey Epstein gifts were supernatural. Able to read the other person's feelings, emotions, and thoughts. They were supernatural.
But even in death, it's still, of course, a subject of exactly what happened. Exactly who is he and exactly how did he die?
The fact that nobody can explain definitively his death adds to the mystery, which also adds to the intrigue and interest.
I don't think anyone will ever know. I think that there will always be those who question if Mr. Epstein committed suicide or if there was some other element of foul play. We know that this is a man that was a billionaire. We know that he ran in circles with some of the most powerful and richest people in the world. So anything is within the realm of possibility. There will always be more to the Epstein story.
All these people, from federal prosecutors to politicians to prison officials, say there will be accountability. Really? I don't see any indictments. No accountability at all. To me, it's just been a travesty.
Do you think that was an appropriate punishment for a monster like Epstein?
Do I feel his death was an appropriate punishment? Absolutely not. It gives nobody justice, and it leaves a lot of unanswered questions.
The scale of what he did is almost too much for the human mind to take in. We are talking about, at a minimum, hundreds of victims, potentially thousands. I believe it was probably thousands of victims. Because I believe those who came forward are just the tip of the iceberg. Most of them are never going to want to come forward.
And the victims are getting zero right now. No more payments being issued, not any money.
And I think everybody wants to see justice for the victims here. If I could wave a magic wand, all of his estate would go to his victims.
How empowering has it been to meet the other victims?
I'd say it's pretty empowering. It's also pretty upsetting to see how many lives he's devastated and to see how long this went on for and nobody did anything about it.
And why did no one do anything about it? Well, if you think about it, Epstein and Maxwell both maintained that there were recording devices in the mansions and the properties and the fancy jet. And there were a lot of really important, powerful people that trafficked through those areas. So wisdom might have it that there's some pretty compromising video and sound somewhere out there.
I can only hope that someday it leaks out and the guilty parties get what's coming to them.
I felt I was held to silence for so long and suffocated by silence. I gave up everything, and I mean everything, because I gave up my health too. Now I'm very, very sick with a brain tumor. So I'm drawing this project. This tree is the tree of rotten apples. These are the evil roots of the apple tree. Alex Acosta, Ellen Dershowitz, Les Wexner. I put Jeffrey Epstein up in this UFO because he's free and easy flying around. So Maxwell, you know, her pearls and fetching children, it's really creepy. All I wanted was for people to know the truth. And I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm not going to be quiet. I'm doing the series, drawing all the women, all their portraits, honoring them because they're victims, but they're also survivors. I'm giving them each a drawing so that they know that they matter. We're binding together, and there's strength in numbers. Let me tell you something. They aren't going to get away with it anymore. 2020 is the year that the predators become the prey. It'd be a wonderful thing, wouldn't it?